Did you know that the two biggest cities in the Pacific Northwest are both named after people who spent time here in very different capacities, but with a wee bit of overlap? Captain George Vancouver and Chief Seattle. While the cities are relatively close together, just a short drive through the I-5 corridor, the graves of these two namesakes are thousands of miles apart, but each worth a visit. Historian Feliks Banel visited both graves recently and joins me to share more. This is so fascinating. So let's talk about this. Two men, worlds apart, but both mattered to this area a great deal. Let's start with Captain George Vancouver. We'll start northward and move down.
Royal Navy explorer, came to the Northwest Coast back in 1792, mapped, charted Puget Sound, named everything, named Puget Sound, named Mount Baker, named Mount Rainier, named Bainbridge Island, named Whidbey Island.
What?
Named King TV. No, I'm just kidding about that last one.
Wait a minute.
But the survey work he and his crew did, they still use that. The data they collected is such high quality.
Really?
Because this area was relatively unexplored by Europeans. Captain Vancouver came through, spent all this time, wrote a massive journal, but then he died at a very young age.
How?
They think maybe tuberculosis, something like that. He was only 40. He'd gone back to England to work on the journals to publish the account of his voyages, but he died in 1798 and was buried in this little village called Petersham, which is just west of London, west of a place called Richmond. If you've ever been to Kew Gardens, this is just a short bus ride from Kew Gardens. I was in London with my family a couple months ago and thought, wait a minute, Captain Vancouver's grave. Oh, we're going to Kew Gardens. I'll take the bus from Kew Gardens up to Petersham.
Wow.
So you take the bus out to this little village. I got off on the wrong side and walked into this park and spent an hour wandering around, not being able to find the grave. If I just opened my eyes, I would have seen the sign across the street that says St. Peter's Church, Petersham Graveyard, and it's this beautiful, classic, ancient British burial ground. Yeah, that's the churchyard of St. Peter's Church, and we're looking at the backside. There's the front of Captain Vancouver's grave.
Wow.
Same essential head. We think it's the same headstone from 1798.
Wow.
And the city of Vancouver, British Columbia, sends a few $100s each year to help with the upkeep. They have to pay for mowing the lawn or whatever.
Our city of Vancouver.
Vancouver up in British Columbia.
Yeah.
There's a deep connection. And then, people go there in pilgrimages. It's not the kind of thing where you see thousands of people going there. I was there by myself. I didn't see anyone else that day.
You did not pilgrimage with others?
No, but every May, to commemorate the day that they buried Captain Vancouver back in 1798, they have a ceremony. All the different Sea Scouts come and mayors of the village, and it's just a sort of festive occasion to mark the fact that this guy who had a huge impact on how this area was settled, all the way the economy played out, the way the political boundary was set at the 49th parallel between here and Canada. A lot of it traces back to the work that Captain Vancouver did, and so it makes sense that the city would be named for him, and that they have this grave thousands of miles away from here.
Unbelievable. Wow, that is so fascinating. All right, well, let's talk about Chief Seattle. Much closer to us here, buried. So let's talk about him, and you've also visited his grave.
Yeah, this is much closer to home. It's over in Suquamish, over on the Port Madison Indian Reservation. If you take the ferry to Bainbridge or the ferry to Kingston, it's just a short little 15-20 minute drive. Beautiful setting on the hillside. Now, Chief Seattle, he was here when the settlers from the Midwest arrived in 1851 and really helped those settlers get grounded, survive that first winter, understand how to live in the Northwest. Without Chief Seattle's assistance and his attitude and his approach to the fact that his world was changing, all these non-native people were essentially invading, those settlers recognized him for the statesman he was, and they named the city after him in 1852. He was still very much alive. Like Vancouver was named in 1885. Vancouver had been dead for almost 100 years at that point.
Right.
But Seattle was named when Seattle was here and walking the streets and alive, which is kind of bizarre.
So cool.
And the grave, it's this beautiful setting. It's a hillside. You can see through the trees. You can see Puget Sound, named by Captain Vancouver. You can see Mount Rainier, named by Captain Vancouver. And this headstone that dates to 1890, that was dedicated more than 100 years ago, even though the chief had died in 1866. It's been this constant place of pilgrimage. The Suquamish people there and the Port Madison Indian Reservation revere him deeply and maintain it. And it's just this beautiful setting that it's just so close to the city that he's named after. It's so worth the drive and so easy to get there.
Is that this cool connection between Captain Vancouver and that Seattle is on Puget Sound? Is that the only connection?
Well, in 1792, when Vancouver is sailing through in his ship here in what he named Puget Sound, Chief Seattle is maybe 12 years old, 10 years old, and the stories say that Seattle and his father saw Vancouver's ships moored there in what's now Puget Sound. They didn't meet, they didn't come face to face, but they overlap just slightly in this amazing sort of juncture of time and history of one man who would sail back home and die almost right away, and another guy who would grow and become the leader of the natives who were here when the people arrived because of Vancouver. It's all tied. It makes your head spin. It's all tied together, but it's all about people and how we remember them and how we honor them. And that's the kind of stuff I love that.
And speaking of remembering and honoring people, you've been to a lot of cemeteries. We actually
spend a
want to
lot
do
of
a
time in
whole
cemeteries.
segment with Feliks about cemeteries. Why are they so important?
Well, they used to be, they're like parks, and 100 years ago it wasn't unusual for people to have picnics in cemeteries to be near the graves of their loved ones. It makes perfect sense. Yeah. And there's a big movement just in the last, I don't know, decade or so. People put on concerts in graveyards. They do tours, history tours and things.
Right.
But people have picnics and they gather because, like the Chief Seattle grave, the setting is so gorgeous that over there in Suquamish. You could spend the day there just sitting, watching the light change and hearing the wind blowing through the trees, and it's like a park.
That's really fascinating. I really feel like I want to have a fireplace constructed here at New Day, because I just want to have you tell us fireside tales all the time. But before I let you go, I want to ask you, do you know the etymology of Puget Sound? I mean, if Captain Vancouver named it, what is Puget? Where did it come from?
The name Puget might actually be French in origin. Peter Puget was a member of his crew who did a lot of surveying. Like they would send out guys in rowboats to actually map the areas they couldn't get to with the big ships.
Right.
And Puget Sound, when it was first named, is really just the part down by Olympia. The idea of Puget Sound was much smaller when Vancouver named it. Over time, it grew to include everything up to the San Juan Islands. That became Puget Sound.
Because then that's when they discovered all this other area.
It just made, for some reason, it's not clear exactly why, but the name Puget Sound came to apply to this entire body of water, which would have had 4 or 5 different names. It's a little complex, but it makes perfect sense now.
Well, it's fascinating because it's not just a geographical thing, because we've seen fjords and things like that, but so this is more man decided, this is what we're going to call it.
Yeah, and the indigenous people had called it something for thousands of years before that, but as the people from Europe came, the whole notion of everything changed. Maps and property ownership and names, it's all, it won't be on the midterm though, don't worry.
Oh, thank goodness. Oy vey. I always want extra credit with Feliks. Thank you so much. This was really fascinating. I appreciate this.
My pleasure.